Bobby will take it from there and guide us through this. So let's have a word of prayer. God, we come together this morning to acknowledge you. And God, as we think about why we come together this morning, it is overwhelming. It is unfathomable for us to even think about why we have to gather like this. But God, we give you thanks for Bobby Starr. We give you thanks for Micah's promise. We give you thanks for men and women around the world who are working on your behalf to rid the world of this horrible disease, this horrible situation. So Lord, bless Bobby as she comes this morning. Speak to us through her. May we all be attentive and in tune through the power of your Holy Spirit. We give you this time in Jesus' name. Amen. So Arden's going to come and introduce Bobby, and then Bobby will get us started. Welcome, Bobby.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Arden Cheney, and I had the pleasure of meeting Bobby in my mom's Sunday school class about 7 years ago. And I had been talking to my mom about trafficking for a long time, and she said to me, I think you might want to come to my Sunday school class. There's a lady named Bobby. She's going to tell us all about trafficking. So, of course, I jumped on that and met Bobby. She gave her whole story, and I left there just saying, whatever you're doing is whatever I'm going to do. So she's allowed me to be along the ride for the last 7 years or so, and it's my pleasure that she's here to talk to all of us. My good friend Bobby.
Good morning. I am extremely humbled to be here today and have this opportunity. I'm humbled that God has brought me people like Arden to walk alongside this journey. Who here has seen The Sound of Freedom? Okay, a good many of you. I'm extremely grateful for this movie, that this movie actually, despite a lot of people not wanting it to be released, that it was released, because this movie is based on true, actual facts. But what I'm here to tell you this morning is what it looks like here. So trafficking, human trafficking, is a very complex, complicated evil. And I learned about it 14 years ago. So in 2009, I was a victim advocate for the Sexual Assault Support Center. I went to a national conference in New Orleans, and one of the breakout sessions was on domestic minor sex trafficking. And it's domestic because it's here. It's homegrown. And so that was 14 years ago. And in that breakout session, all the presenters were from Atlanta. So I had left Georgia to go to this national crime conference to hear about how dangerous other states were. And I learned from my own state that we were in the top 10 at the time of trafficking of children, and that they were American children, they were Georgia's children, and some children had been being arrested for prostitution since the age of 9 and 10. And as an advocate, it broke my heart, and I asked those presenters, what can we do in Columbus? You know, we're right down the road. What can we do in Columbus? And they said, we need therapeutic homes for the trafficked kids. We need a therapeutic placement because the children are being arrested and they're being sent to juvie for their victimization, right? So I spoke to the presenters. Again, I'm kind of a passionate, impulsive person. And so I said, well, I mean, how do I go about that? How do I do that? And they asked me what my degree was in. And I told them I didn't have a degree. I'd never gone to college. I wasn't smart enough for college. And these strong women looked at me and said, go to college. And I said, okay, well, what do I get my degree in? They said, sociology or criminal justice. So with God's help, I went and got a degree in sociology and criminal justice and graduated top of my class. And that is a hallelujah to the Lord, because when God set me on this path, he was going to make sure that I made it all the way through. And then I got a master's degree in public administration, fighting this issue the whole way, oftentimes fighting my professors in 2010, who criminal justice professors said prostitution's a victimless crime. Like no little girl wants to grow up and be a prostitute. This is what's happening to people, is people who have no options when they're children, people who are abused when they're children. They can't make that kind of choice when you have no options. So I learned as much as I could, and then in 2014, a group of us came together at my church, and we created Micah's Promise. We are based on Micah 6:8, which is my life verse, and it just encompasses everything that God has called us to do for the vulnerable and the oppressed. We are to seek justice, we are to love mercy and give them mercy, and we are to walk humbly with him, trusting that it's his work and he will lead it. So our main goals are to educate, to advocate, and restore. I do a lot of education, a lot of training. I'm a traveling roadshow. Anybody that asks me to come talk about it, I will come talk about it and educate you about it. We do a lot of advocating. The last 2 years, I've advocated for 6 or 7 different children with the court system to get them identified as CSEC victims, some in Harris County, some in Muskogee. Work closely with Judge Loudermilk. He's amazing. And Judge Kennan and Judge Dodgen. All of our juvenile court judges are awesome. And ultimately restore. We just completed, and I can't thank Arden Cheney enough and God bringing me her and her mom. I've been on this journey trying to build this therapeutic home, like I said, for 14 years. I thought I was just supposed to tell people about it, and somebody with money and with a business sense and somebody who's maybe even in this space already would just go do it, and that wasn't God's plan. But we just completed construction, and Arden did all of the interior design in this beautiful, restful, peaceful therapeutic home. So I like to always make sure that you know I'm going to talk about hard things. So I also know that 1 in 3 to 4 girls have been sexually abused by the age of 18, and 1 in 6 boys. So somebody in this room may have experienced some of the things I'm going to talk about. I am a survivor of childhood abuse and sexual assault, and so I know keenly how it can affect your self-esteem and your relationships, and so, which is why I'm so passionate for these kids. So what is domestic minor sex trafficking? It is actually a form of human trafficking. It is human trafficking, but it's human trafficking of children. So exploitation is trafficking. Through the use of force, fraud, or coercion, you compel somebody to do a labor act or a sex act. That's an adult. When it comes to children, we don't have to prove anything because they're children. And to make it even simpler, the exchange of anything of value with a child for a sex act, whether it's food or shelter or a cell phone or paying mom's rent, that is exploitation. The simple giving of something in exchange for that child is exploitation. What does it look like here in our state? This is this past year's statistics. So we've had over 750 youth provided services by our state CSEC response team. The average age is 13. The average age when they're identified is 14. There were 26 in the Chattahoochee Judicial District this past year, 20 of them in Muskogee. Let that sink in. What grade is a 13-year-old in? 6th, 7th. And by the time of identification, this has been going on for quite a while. So what you see in The Sound of Freedom, the kidnapping of that child, in America, that's not the reality. In America, it's through relationships. Even in The Sound of Freedom, based on a true story, first the woman built a relationship. She got the father to trust her, right? Well, that is what these people do. These perpetrators get the children to trust them, which is not hard to do with a child who's already experienced a lot of trauma in their lifetime. And they get them to trust them, they build a relationship with them, and then they exploit them. What's surprising is that most of these children are still registered in school. And I need that to sink in because in America, kidnapping is not the #1 way this happens. Absolutely not. It's not the white van at Target and Walmart. It's not somebody targeting somebody my age. I don't know if some of y'all have heard the stories or seen the stories on Facebook. That is not how this happens. Again, it's through relationships. 2.5 million youth at any given time in America are homeless. That's a vulnerability. Trafficking is people prey on a vulnerability. And the number one vulnerability for children is their age. They're children. Their brain's not fully formed until 24 to 26. Add trauma on top of that, and they're not able to make any kind of good decisions, and add homelessness on there. And what do you need when you're a kid living on the street? You need food, you need shelter. That's why the law is the exchange of anything of value. And we tend to see boys sexually exploited due to their homelessness. Has anybody heard of the ACEs score? Adverse childhood experiences. This is a really important thing to understand. The more adverse childhood experiences an individual goes through, the higher their rate of possibility to have heart disease, diabetes, be trafficked, have drug and alcohol issues. So think of our children in foster care. They have very high ACEs scores. Adverse childhood experiences makes a child extremely vulnerable to further abuse. Maybe look at it for yourselves and see how many of these can you count to know whether or not you have a high ACEs score. And the ACEs score really comes into account when you don't get help for those different traumas. I actually have a high ACEs score. But God, right? God has done so much in me, through me, that I'm eternally grateful. I would never be standing up here talking to y'all had it not been for the things that God has worked through my life, the things where he took ashes and made beauty from it. And I'm just that walking testimony. So I tell you that children in foster care are disproportionately represented in trafficking. We have a foster care crisis. We have an epidemic across the U.S. We have very few foster families, and we have kids as young as 10 being thrown in group homes with kids who are 17. And it's heartbreaking because they are so vulnerable to trafficking. But due to technology, this is who is vulnerable to being sexually exploited. Does this look like any middle schooler you know? Right. Every middle schooler. Every middle schooler. The internet leveled the playing field. Technology leveled the playing field. Predators have unfettered access to children. And again, kids can't, they think they can. The kids really don't know how to navigate adults with a plan. And adults with a plan that works very well for them over time, this is now where trafficking solidly is. Recruitment is online. Selling is online. Coordinating where this is going to take place, this exchange with the child is online. And then it's very scary that 53% of American children have their own smartphone by the age of 11. There's no way to protect them on there unless you have a Bark phone, bark.us. So to really understand trafficking in America, this is not a kidnapping situation. Again, it's relational. It's built through relationships. It's built out of desperation for these kids. Sometimes it's built into their home, in their neighborhoods. Would you be surprised to know that half of trafficking in the U.S. is familial trafficking? Somebody in their family is doing this. And when it's familial trafficking, the average age is 5, but can be as young as an infant. And that's the hardest one to find because that child is loyal to their parents and they don't know anything besides what's happening to them. They don't know to tell. Gangs recruitment for dancing. Anybody that wants to pay a teenager more than they would pay an adult, that's a major red flag. Do teenagers do really, really good work at the age of 14? Somebody's offering to pay them $20 an hour to sell magazines or whatever. Anytime it's too good to be true, it's too good to be true. Language really matters. This is one of my soapboxes, is when we label kids and then we stop looking at them as the most vulnerable, like the 7-year-old who is kidnapped in Sound of Freedom. When we hear stories of a 7-year-old being kidnapped, we immediately, our hearts break. It's heart-wrenching. You think of the innocence of that 7-year-old, and we want to fight, and we want to protect them, and we want to get involved. But when we hear or see on the news that 14-year-old runs away, 14-year-old runaway, we don't feel that heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching, I've got to fight for this kid. We hear, that's a troubled kid. That's another one of those troubled kids. We have to know that that person, that child who is running away, is the most critically missing youth in our community. They're the most critically vulnerable youth. Because what are they running from? And what are they running to? They could be running from the abuse at home to the trafficker who's been grooming them online. These are the different, we call them the 5 paradigms of trafficking. There is family facilitated. Please understand, if you're ever on a jury, I want you to remember that you heard this so that you're not shocked and in disbelief, not listen to the prosecutor when they talk about this, because it actually happens. It actually happens. Of the family facilitated in Georgia, 25% of trafficking victims, they did a survey last year, and that's just on the identified victims' histories, 25% was familial. Of that 25% of that was mothers. And when it tends to be mothers, it's single moms with boyfriends. When it's dads, it's 13%, and it's because they're a pedophile and they're doing it to exchange their child in exchange for other children. That's right here in Georgia. Gang facilitated. Who knows we have gangs? This is the #1 way for gangs to make money. When you can sell a human being over and over and over, when you run out of a drug, you have to go get more drugs, right? So that exchange is harder than just selling somebody over and over. And when you have a plethora of vulnerable kids in foster care and living on the street who need family, guess what the gang does? The gang replaces family. And guess how God wired us? I know how God wired us. He wired us to be in relationship. When he made Adam, he's like, this is good, but I want to give him a partner. From the beginning, we're supposed to be in relationship, and we're wired to love. So a vulnerable kid who's been abused, they still want love. And these people come in and supply it. Then there's trafficker facilitated, and then the buyer facilitated is for those who don't have that third party with the trafficker. And then technology facilitated, which sadly there are criminal organizations internationally that are targeting boys between 12 and 14 because they're an easy target online. And they blackmail them, and some children have actually committed suicide because they didn't know they could go talk to mom and dad about making a bad decision. So I always tell people, please tell your kids every single day, there's nothing you could ever do, no mistake you could make that I won't love you through, that I won't help you navigate. There's nothing you can do. So don't ever believe anybody. If you make the poorest choice, if you break the worst rule, we're going to get through it. Because on the other side, the perpetrator is telling them, your family's going to kick you out. Your friends are going to ostracize you. Nobody will ever care about you again. You're rotten. You're terrible. Your parents will go to jail. Just whatever. And where does trafficking happen? It happens everywhere. It happens at our local hotels, even nice ones. It happens in neighborhoods. It happens at conventions. This is a couple of years old, but so the hot spots in the U.S., and see down here in the southern states, we're pretty hot spotty, in California. And then that's the map of Georgia. And what we saw trend-wise during COVID, the numbers went down. Y'all might not be able to see the numbers, but during COVID, there were 221 confirmed CSEC. In 2019, there were over 1,000. So do you think that CSEC, that trafficking of kids, went down during COVID? No. No. Guess who didn't have access to those kids during COVID? Their teachers. Teachers are our number one first responders. They're the ones that are the most consistent person in children's lives, especially if they don't have loving parents. So the teachers didn't have eyes on them, and also the exploiters were at home. They had more time to be on the computer. But the numbers are rising again because we're all back out and we're all able to advocate and investigate. Checking time. These are two stories that happened in Georgia. These are case studies of trafficked children who were trafficked by their families. And so there are different ways along the way that somebody in their community could have intervened for them. Their neighbors could have, the teachers could have, the school system could have. Kayla's 15. At 13, her mom and dad took her out of traditional school and said they were going to homeschool her. Well, Kayla's mom and dad had moved in an adult male who was paying all the bills, and so they made Kayla take care of this grown man. So by the time she turns 15, she just can't take it anymore, and she runs away. She's not a runaway, she runs away. Luckily, the neighbors did make a call because it seemed odd to them that the parents came to them days after she had run away, not within 5 minutes of her running away. And so when they talked to law enforcement, they said that didn't make any sense. You call right away when your child goes missing. Luckily, when law enforcement came in and found Kayla, the law enforcement officer had had trauma-informed training. He didn't approach her like, you bad kid, you scared your parents, you know, you're just a troubled kid. He approached her with, are you okay? Do you feel safe at home? Is there anything I can do to help you? What's going on at home? Because he approached it that way, she was able to trust him that he really was there to help her. And she let it all come out, and she told him the straw that broke the camel's back was Dad had told her because she was rebelling and didn't want to do this anymore. And Dad's a truck driver. And so Dad said, well, if you don't do it here, you can go with me on the road. That was enough to make her finally run away. And the other case study is Janiyah, and she's 11 years old. And Janiyah used to be a good student in class. She never gave anybody trouble. Well, all of a sudden, she starts fighting with her classmates. She is just wanting to fight anybody. She's 11. She's wanting to fight anybody. And then she's suspected of burglarizing something near where she lives. Again, thankfully, trauma-informed law enforcement and her teachers saying something's going on with Janiyah, instead of just, that Janiyah's a bad kid. They looked deeper and found out that Janiyah's mother was trafficking her to pay her father's commissary bill in prison. Kids who get caught up, kids who are exploited, they end up with trauma bonds with their exploiter. This is what I think is the hardest thing for people to understand. But if you can understand domestic violence, if you know anything about domestic violence, if you know how hard it is for me as an adult to get out of the cycle of violence. Adults, it takes them 7 attempts to get out of a domestic violence situation. They love their partner. They just want them not to hurt them anymore. They think if they can do something else to go back to that first time, that when they were grooming them and wooing them, it'll be okay. Well, that's what's going on with these kids. This person stepped in and offered a relationship, a way out of their broken lives, and then trafficked them. They just want this person to go back to how they were in the beginning. And I'm getting really close, but I want to show you, I want to dispel any idea of what you have of what a trafficker looks like. It's not the boogeyman. It's not the trafficker, the pimp in the 1970s or 80s cop shows. Traffickers are anybody who has that blackness in their heart, that evil in their heart, to harm another person for their gain. This is Maria. She is a convicted trafficker. Maria is 18 years old and she's in high school. Her boyfriend wants a nude and she sends the nude. Her boyfriend then says, I know how we can make some money. And he tells her, we can put it on the internet, you can go on some dates, and we can make some money. Well, Maria is very self-confident. Maria's like, no, and she kicks him to the curb. That was a smart move. But Maria now knows how to make money. And Maria is a Best Buddies mentor. Who's heard of Best Buddies? It's a great program. So Best Buddies pairs a student who is into extracurricular things and pairs them with a student with like Down syndrome. And then the child who has mental disabilities gets to participate in extracurricular things. Maria, who's a cheerleader, is a mentor to a 16-year-old girl with Down syndrome who thinks Maria is hung the moon. So she traffics that 16-year-old online, and she was convicted. Anthony went to college and got a degree in criminal justice, became a juvenile justice parole officer, but he never broke his gang ties, and he trafficked youth that were under his authority with his gang. So again, the third guy is a firefighter, 911 operator. He lured a youth when the youth was 10 or 11 years old. He gave him a dirt bike and a crossbow, and he exploited that youth for 10 years. The man on the end represents a buyer. He was convicted of purchasing a 15-year-old girl several occasions from her trafficker. So, they look like us. They look like us. These are warning signs to look for. Y'all, any of the things, if you're an educator, if you're a counselor, if you're a social worker, if you're a parent who has your friends' kids come over a lot, just be paying attention to them. Is there a change in their behaviors? Is there a change in their demeanor? Were they used to be outgoing, are they now shy? Were they used to be quiet, are they now loud? Do they have things that they really shouldn't have because you know their family can't afford it? Why would a kid have a second phone if they have the first phone? Why in the world would a middle schooler or even a high schooler have a hotel key? A 12-year-old with multiple STDs, an older boyfriend, an older girlfriend. All of these things are things to be looking for. And the other thing that I need y'all as a community to do to help protect kids is if you think a child is being abused, please intervene. Please call DFACS. All you have to have is reasonable suspicion. But I said when I first began that we have a foster care epidemic. We have a foster care crisis. Call them anyway. In Muskogee County, we have about 500 kids in care on average. We used to have about 100 foster families. We have about 50 now. Where are they going if they're not going to a loving, trauma-informed foster family? They're going to group homes that are for profit. They're going to group homes where they get traumatized even more. And then they end up needing our services. So we've got to go upstream and start helping these kids early before more trauma happens to them. We're holding a recruitment event in November, and I'm going to send the information to y'all's church. And I really, if you have ever felt God's impressing upon you the desire to be a foster parent, now is the time. We are in critical need. We need to save these kids before they become trafficking victims, and they're the most vulnerable to trafficking. So that's Department of Family and Children's Services. If you come across anything online that is inappropriate communication with a child, NCMEC is the place to make that cyber tip. Georgia, our Georgia state hotline is really the best hotline to call instead of the national if you suspect a child is being trafficked, because the national is just going to shoot it straight to the Georgia hotline. I'm on the state trafficking task force. I'm the co-chair of the state human trafficking committee, and we work really closely with the state's CSEC response team. So they're the ones to go to. If you want to get involved, this is heavy on a Sunday. I got to thank y'all again, and it's a lot to absorb. I'm going to get to some good news here in a second, I promise. We always need prayer. Advocate for kids. If you have children, get them a Bark phone. Bark like a dog, bark.us. Subscribe to Bark. It alerts the parents if somebody is bullying your kid, if your child is bullying somebody, if somebody's being sexually inappropriate. It alerts the parents. It communicates with you. It's the only way to keep your kids safe online. That subscription now even covers your Wi-Fi. Now, here's the good news. These are pictures of our therapeutic home. And I am just blown away. I am in awe every time I drive into the property. Every girl has her own bedroom and her own bathroom. Now, these kids are so traumatized. Even the ability to lock your bedroom door is something that is going to be amazing to them. They get to choose to lock their door. So sweet. This room in the upper left, that is our therapy room. Y'all, and Arden, everybody when they walk through, in every room, they're like, oh my gosh, this color, it's so peaceful. I'm like, Arden Cheney. Thinking through every single thing, like what's happening in this room? This is the color it needs to be. What's happening in this room? So our therapy room, we do individual and group therapy. This is the intake room in the lower right-hand corner. When the child is brought to our program, she's driven through security gates, the gates closed, she's now in the safe, contained area of the home. This is the first room she comes into. She'll meet with a social worker here. They'll do an initial assessment, a psychological assessment. She'll get her learning, her educational assessment, and she may even need to stay in this room overnight just to be able to, before we just push her into the program. We added a shower there. She might be coming straight from a trafficking situation. So we're going to have cozy clothes in that room. She'll take a shower, change her clothes. We'll get rid of what she came in with. And then she'll go into the program. Oh, y'all, this is our classroom. See the upper right? So we have our own classroom, our own special ed teacher. These kids, they haven't been in school regularly for some time, and so each one of them will need their own individual learning plan. And upstairs from the classroom, we have a yoga room that's the same size as the classroom. So it's an art room / yoga room, Pilates, karate, whatever somebody wants to come teach these kids. I got a room for it. Our kitchen is just gorgeous and amazing, and this long table holds like 20 people. So we'll have community meals with the girls. The staff will always have community meals with them. This is a community room. We have 2 bedroom wings, a community room, 6 bedrooms, 6 bath, and the staff office. The outdoor classroom, okay, I'm so excited about that because when we started building, the property's beautiful. And so I want them to be outside as much as possible. And we know that being outside, I've read some research studies that show that children learn better when you give them that break, right? Those of us who are older used to have PE. in the middle of the day, but children retain better, especially kids with ADD and ADHD, when they go outside and do an activity outside. So I told Phil Webb, I said, we need an outdoor classroom. And he's like, nope, it's not on the list. I'm like, we're going to get it because God told me we need this outdoor classroom. And so different people came together and built that for us. We have a tennis court. Come on. With pickleball lines. I haven't figured out pickleball yet, but tennis is my jam. It's probably inappropriate, but I like to tell people that hitting people is frowned upon. And in the work that I do, there are times that I want to, so I hit a tennis ball instead. So, thank you so much. I am, 10:40, look at me. I'm going to stop early so that you, if anybody does have a question, you can ask it. But thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to talk to y'all today about a really heavy, hard subject, but a really bad reality for kids right here in your town, possibly on your street, in your kids' school. And I have to tell you that I have tried for years to tell people about this, and in the early years, it took me 7 years just to kind of get somebody to open a door and believe me that this was real. And then I've heard so many times from people, I can't hear about that, that's too dark. That hurts me too much, I can't know. And I have finally gotten to the place where I tell them when they say that, if these kids can live through what's happening to them, the least you can do is know about it. But then once you know about it, you can't not do something about it. Thank you so much.